Sarah. Thanks, Brad. My name is Sarah Marchese. I'm the Research Data Manager with FAS Research Computing. Welcome to our seminar today, Managing Research Data at FAS Research Computing. As you just noticed, we'll be recording today's session and all the materials will be available after. I work with faculty, staff, researchers across FAS and other Harvard schools to better manage research data throughout the data lifecycle. I also offer trainings and consultations on topics including data storage, data organization, and data sharing. And I help to develop data management resources and tools that can help you track your storage usage and prepare your data for sharing and reuse. I've also been working with a few different vendors over the past several years to develop and refine data transfer processes, assisting researchers with data cleanup efforts and migrating data through the life cycle from active to long-term storage. And then a bit more about us, FAS Research Computing. We were established in 2007. So we're almost at 20 years. We reside in the Division of Science at FAS, and we oversee the High Performance Compute Cluster, or CANON, as well as a secure enclave for sensitive data, which we call FASRC. Several different types of research data storage, both free or complimentary and paid services. We offer access to scientific software and different applications and training and consultations related to data science and research computing. As a group, we assist over 800 different lab groups. We have over 7,000 users, and we manage and maintain at least 76 petabytes of research data storage across 3 different data centers. We also work with the Northeast Storage Exchange. We oversee 99,000 CPU cores, over 1,000 GPUs, and 1,500 compute nodes. So we're one of the larger research computing groups at a university. So for today's session, our learning objectives, we'll talk about what research data management is, why it's important, and how you can move data through your project lifecycle. We will highlight some data management policies and procedures, including those specific to Harvard. We'll talk about some data organizational techniques to make your data more discoverable and also make sure you're adhering to any data management sharing plans. How to improve your data analyses using different collaborative tools like RSpace, which is an electronic lab notebook that is supported by Harvard, and other third-party tools like GitHub or Globus. We'll talk about the data storage offerings that we have here at FAST, as well as some of the recommended workflows around data retention, security, and data cleanup. I'll talk about a few storage tools that we've created that can help you with managing your storage and also with data cleanup efforts. And then lastly, we'll talk about data sharing and reuse and why I think you should use a data repository and how to make sure your data is considered open access. Also, feel free to post any questions you have in the chat. I will go over them following the presentation. You can save your questions to the end and we'll go over those as well. So the National Institutes of Health does define research data management as the process of validating, organizing, protecting, maintaining, and processing scientific data to ensure accessibility, reliability, and quality of the scientific data for its users. So with this definition in mind, why is the act of research data management so important? Good data management techniques can prevent information from getting lost, misplaced, or corrupted. It also ensures your data is accurate and reliable, which ultimately can lead to better research results. It allows for easier data collection, organization, and cleanup, which ultimately could save you time, effort, and funding in the long run. Data management can also make collaboration, both with labs here at Harvard, but also externally with collaborators, more efficient, as cleaner, more succinct data sets are easier to understand and reuse. Well-defined and accessible research materials are essential for reproducibility and transparency. It impacts your research as it gives you credit for work just beyond your article. And various funding agencies and publishers often now require the submission of data sets alongside published articles. So overall, proper data management for all of these reasons is a good research practice. When we're talking about research data management, it's good to keep in mind the FAIR data principles. These were published back in 2016 as a set of guiding principles that encourage reusability of digital research. So the acronym is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. FAIR, is it findable or discoverable by others? If someone wanted to use your research data, could they access it? Could they find it? Is it easily accessible to others? Or do they have to go through any sort of firewalls or things like that? Can the data be accessible from different devices? So is the data in a format that would make it available to everyone, or do they need a specific type of operating system or software? Is the data reusable? Does it contain enough context and information to be reused by other researchers? The FAIR data principles often come into play at the end of research projects as you're getting ready to publish and getting ready to share your data. But it is good to keep the principles in mind even at the start of your project so that you can better manage the data and adhere to this framework from the beginning. I just wanted you to keep this simple acronym in mind as we work our way through the slide deck and think about your research data and whether or not it would be qualifying as FAIR data. So what is research data? Research data can be collected, created, acquired, downloaded, many different ways throughout a research project. It could result from projects conducted at the university or on Harvard property. It could be developed or collected under the direction of the university, or even through research activities occurring elsewhere, including data collected using university resources like equipment or funding. One thing to note, Harvard does have ownership over all research data resulting from projects conducted at the university or using university resources. The research data lifecycle is a representation of your project stages from data creation to publication and how it manipulates the associated data. So the lifecycle begins with planning and design of your project, followed by data generation and analysis, data storage, and eventually data publication, sharing, and reuse. And while the project, your specific project might not follow this exact course or move fluidly from one stage to the next, there might be instances where you'd have to reverse course or reanalyze a data set, but in general, most research projects are going to follow this similar path. Your data management activities are also going to vary by discipline, institution, and research project, which ultimately makes offering these types of services at a broader level, at the university level, a challenge. There are many different types of data generated at each stage of a research project. You have your source data or raw data. This is data that's not been processed, modified, or analyzed. It could derive from an instrument or have been downloaded or acquired from an outside entity. And then during the data processing, this raw data is cleaned, sorted, filtered, etc., to reduce the number of unnecessary, inaccurate, or redundant fields. This step is especially important and it often doesn't get as much hype, but it does ensure higher quality results and can help you to streamline your data analysis process. So then we move into data analysis, which is the process of inspecting, cleansing, transforming, and modeling your data with the goal of discovering useful information and informing your conclusions and supporting your decision making. And then finally, data will be published alongside your scholarly work. In the last decade, it's become increasingly common for researchers to make their data available to others as part of their project completion. So now that we understand what research data management is, what we're qualifying as scientific research data, we should review what data management policies and procedures apply here at the university. We'll talk about how to draft a data management and sharing plan, which is required by certain funders. We'll talk about data use agreements or DUAs and how they might apply to your research project. We'll talk about roles and responsibilities within the lab related to data management. And then I have some suggestions for how to organize your data, including file naming conventions and directory structures. So I do recommend that you be cognizant of any existing lab, department, or university policies and procedures related to research data. There are several institutional policies that you should be familiar with. The first of which is the research data ownership policy. The university is the owner of research data produced and analyzed for projects at the university. And it also states that the PI or faculty member is responsible for maintaining the data and is considered the data steward. We then have the research data security policy, which offers guidance on how you can keep your data safe and secure. And it's focused specifically on confidential and sensitive research information. We then have the data retention policy. This is a general institutional policy that stipulates that essential research records need to be retained for 7 years following the end of a research project. There are also several funder policies you should be aware of, especially if you have any grants with the NIH or NSF, as well as guidance from other entities like the GDPR or General Data Protection Regulation, which applies to projects that are in collaboration with groups in the European Union. So a data management plan, or DMP, is a formal document that outlines how data will be handled during and after a research project. Many funding agencies, especially government sources, will require a DMP as part of your grant application process. Even if you're not seeking funding from a grant agency that requires a DMP, it is still good to document a plan for your research data. It's just a best practice, and it's going to help make sure you comply with all those data policies that we just mentioned. Funders will expect the data management plans to be continually updated throughout the entirety of your research grant, so you might need to alter the document over time to reflect any changes that might have occurred. So if you originally indicated you were going to store data in a particular location and that no longer was the case due to maybe running out of space, or maybe your data can't be housed there anymore and you had to move it to a different location, that needs to be indicated and updated in your DMP. Harvard does offer an online template in DMP tool, which is an online tool that you can use that's actually funded and offered by Harvard Library. It provides Harvard-specific guidance on how you can draft and submit a data management plan. And it also offers templates for various funders. There's a NSF and an NIH template in there because they all offer various requirements of what they want in a DMP. So as long as you have a Harvard email address and can log in with Harvard Key, you can access the DMP tool. You may also be required to follow a DUA, or a data use agreement, in order to acquire data sets. A data use agreement is a binding contract that governs the access and treatment of non-public data. So they're often required by external parties before they permit you to use their data or for their data to be received by Harvard. It also might be necessary if you're sharing Harvard data to another organization. They are considered research-related agreements and therefore must be reviewed and signed by the Office of the Vice Provost for Research, the OVPR. The different terms and conditions are going to vary depending on the laws and regulations that govern that specific type of data, as well as the policies and requirements of the provider and the recipient. These types of formal agreements are nice because they do help avoid any misunderstandings or disputes over the use and storage of the data, and they clearly outline who can have access to them, what security is required, and other important matters, including publication rights and ownership of the results. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, the PI, as I mentioned, is the data steward. They are ultimately responsible for data generated in their lab, but oftentimes there are additional responsibilities that extend beyond the PI or even the researcher who initially created or collected the data. Various parties are involved in the research process and can play a role in ensuring quality data stewardship. It is essential that the roles and responsibilities of data management are clearly defined and assigned in the lab rather than assumed. Identifying specific tasks and the responsible parties is going to help with things like budgeting, implementation, and preservation of data resources. We do generally recommend that each group or lab have a general data manager, someone in the lab who can act as a primary contact point between FASRC and the lab, and can also take on additional responsibilities as needed, like promoting and supporting data management best practices, helping to organize folder structures, identifying data that could be deleted or moved to long-term storage. So a tangible way that you could see immediate improvements to your lab's data organization is by implementing consistent and streamlined directory structures. For your folder structure, I do suggest you arrange your files hierarchically. So a series of nested folders, each containing additional files and subfolders. One recommendation is to separate each project into their own folder. And then within that project folder, you can create additional subfolders based on attributes, which allow you to keep separate items stored together. This organizational structure is ideal because it's widely used, it's familiar, it's also good at representing the structure of information. In this example directory structure, we have the top folder, which is for the project, and then subfolders for data, code, and documentation. You'll notice also that the data has been divided into raw and processed data. It is good practice to keep your raw data separate from your processed data, just so that it isn't modified or lost. As soon as you begin to manipulate the data in any way, it should be saved separately as processed data. Some labs even save their raw data in a completely separate location, which is also a good strategy as it limits the possibility of modification or destruction. The best organizational system is going to be the one that works. So I would take a look at your project folders and see how you're already organizing them and see how you can modify them to make it more organized. That's going to work best for your lab and your situation. So similar to the establishment of a well-defined directory structure, you can also improve your organization by enhancing your file naming conventions. This will significantly improve the searchability of your files. A decent file naming convention is going to include key pieces of contextual information about that file that'll make it easier to visually or digitally scan and immediately discern the contents of that file just based on the naming convention. Some general recommendations for file naming conventions: maintain the same convention throughout the project. Describe what the files actually contain and how they're related to one another. You can include useful information like project name, date, maybe a unique identifier like the run that you did or the image number. When working with lots of files and multiple collaborators, you also want to make sure that you're using file versioning to ensure all members of the project are up to date on which version you're using. You can capture the version of the file by adding a version number like V2 or V3. Steer clear of confusing terminology like final or draft. You can also use file sharing platforms that already have version capabilities that are default, like Google Drive or Dropbox. Determine what information is vital to your project and data sets, and then build out the file names from there. It's going to depend on the workflow of your group and the project. Try and make sure that they are machine readable if possible. There are a couple good examples there on the bottom of the slide. As you can see, I used underscores instead of spaces because it's easier for machines to read. Just by looking at that file name, you would know exactly what's in that file itself, the date it was created, what experiment it's associated with, what instrument it was derived from, when it was captured, and the type of file. So it's a TIFF file. So just by looking at the name, you can find out a lot of contextual information about the file itself. Okay, so now that you've established a directory structure, we've talked about file naming conventions, it's still good to indicate additional contextual information in a recorded text file. We call these README files. So you can record any information needed to interpret the context and content of the files within the project folder in the README file. And here we have a good example of a README file from Cornell University. It is good practice to store a README file in the project dataset itself, explaining things like file naming conventions. Maybe you have some abbreviations, codes, different contextual information that's not included in the file name. Grant information, who was listed on the project, contact points, etc. If you are expecting to deposit a data set in a repository when your project is completed, the repositories may even ask you to provide a README file alongside your data sets. So having this information ahead of time is going to make it easier to share your information later. Make sure to update it consistently throughout your project. Sufficient documentation can often determine whether your older sets can be reused. If context is lost over time, it becomes difficult to reuse those data sets. Although we recommend storing the documentation as a README in the project folder, you can also store it in a variety of formats depending on your workflow. So other options could be a paper notebook, electronic lab notebook, code books, data dictionaries. No matter the format, there should just be enough detail so that the research could be picked up by someone else or completed by another group. I do recommend, just as a last note, try and avoid any proprietary formats like Microsoft Word or Excel, as folks need a specific operating system and software license in order to access those documents. As we make our way through the research data lifecycle, we're going to move from data planning to data creation and analysis. So in this section, I'm going to highlight a few useful collaborative tools you can use to help improve your data workflows, as well as talk a little bit about data transfer processes. So our research space is an open source electronic lab notebook supported by University Research Computing in collaboration with Harvard Library. And it's actually offered for free. And it can help researchers organize, store, and share protocols, analysis, and experimental notes in a centralized and secure platform. It was developed in collaboration with researchers and research data professionals and is a widely used tool at universities. It is tailored for academic environments and can help track and manage research data throughout the life cycle. They do support data management practices, review, and oversight. They enable group collaboration, and you can also manage inventories of samples and other equipment. Then there's Open Science Framework. This is provided for free. It's an open source project management tool that's offered through the Center for Open Science. And it supports researchers through the project lifecycle by promoting open, centralized workflows, enabling capture of different aspects and products of your research. And it can be used as a general data repository to store and archive research data, protocols, and materials. I actually use Open Science Framework to store some of my presentations, conference papers, these additional scholarly works that might not be deposited in a standard data repository. And then GitHub, most of you are familiar with GitHub. It's a web-based service for Git repositories. You can use it for managing and sharing different versions of code for programming projects. This is also an open source tool, so it's not hosted by Harvard, but it is an effective version control tool for files and text documents. One of the biggest challenges that labs deal with is transferring data between research platforms. It can be a challenging exercise. I did want to quickly list a few possible tools that can help with data transfers. Selection of the tool will depend on the size of your data set, what security level is associated with that data, and who will actually need access to the data set. So one of the more popular tools that we recommend is Globus. It enables file sharing with external collaborators. So if you're working with other institutions, Globus is a great tool. And then there's rsync, which is a fast and versatile file copying tool. You can migrate modified files from source to destination. So the nice thing about rsync is that if the transfer halts in the middle for some reason, it can pick up where it left off instead of restarting and copying everything from the beginning. FileZilla is an open source client available across platforms, so you can use it on Macs, Windows, Linux, etc. So it's a widely used tool. And then rclone, which is a convenient performant command line tool that you can use for transferring files and synchronizing directories from FASRC file systems to tools like Google Drive, which is helpful if you're using outside vendor tools like Google Drive or Dropbox. Okay, moving on. In this section, we'll talk about data storage workflows, how to migrate data from active to long-term storage. what some of the rules are related to data retention and archiving, what storage options we have here at FASRC with some exciting updates, and then how to keep your data secure and backed up. I'll also talk about a few data storage tools that we developed at FASRC that can help you better manage your storage usage. Similar to the creation of a data management plan at the start of your project, it is helpful to create a data storage plan as well that can outline how you are expecting to store and organize your data throughout the project. To help get you started, I've developed some questions that you can ask yourself related to data storage that could be noted in your data storage plan. Where will my data be kept throughout the project? When and for how long should that data be retained? Different institutions and granting agencies are going to have their own requirements about how long data should be retained. So you'll need to keep all of those policies in mind when determining your data retention for the various data sets. What other data types will you need to store? So you have your research data, but you also might have code, documentation, protocols, etc. And then what formats do you need to save your files in? I do, again, recommend saving your data in an interoperable format so that it's easier to share. And then once you've thought through each of these questions in detail, you can note the answers in your data storage plan. It could be as simple as a text file or incorporating this information into your existing lab documentation. Then you can refer to it throughout your project, and as lab members enter or leave the lab, having this information already compiled and available for review is going to help streamline those onboarding and offboarding processes. So how your research data will be utilized and accessed is going to determine where that data should reside. So similar to your research data lifecycle, you'll also want to be lifecycling your data through a storage workflow from active to long-term storage. Soon after you generate or acquire the raw data, it should be moved to an intermediary location so that you can start working on it, analyzing it. This is a separate location from your raw data. And then once the data has been analyzed and is no longer being frequently accessed or modified, it can then be moved to a longer-term storage option. Data that should be moved to long-term storage are published data sets, data associated with finished projects, archival data, data associated with lab members who've left the lab, etc. So after your project's completed, you'll need to evaluate the data and determine whether it should be moved to long-term storage, whether it can be deleted or destroyed, or whether it should be archived. Eligible for permanent retention might be those that document a breakthrough, or they were generated by a lab or individual who had a great impact on their field, or maybe they're highly reusable to a particular area of research. Archived data is not the same as long-term storage. It often implies ongoing migration of electronic formats and storage costs, as well as maintenance and access to those records. So a very small percentage of data is actually considered archival. Most research data and records are going to have retention policies that tell you the minimum requirements for keeping records. You are not required to keep your data for longer than the retention period that is specified by your institution or granting agency. Often the cost of long-term storage is prohibitive for researchers, so you might not be interested in storing or maintaining data for any longer than that initial retention period. Should your research data not meet that criteria for permanent retention, you may want to take steps to ensure that you've safely and completely disposed of the data once it's met that specified retention period. Always check with the policies of your institution or funder to make sure the destruction actions are in line with their policies. And it is a good idea to create an inventory of those records, including information like formats or dates, granting information with reasons for the data destruction and an authorized signature, for example. The benefit of documenting the disposal of research data is multifold, including responsible management of your data, but also it avoids any future confusion about missing or abandoned data. So we've kind of danced around this topic of data retention for a few slides, but just for context, data retention is that length of time that data needs to be kept in order to meet funder requirements or institutional policies. As I mentioned, at Harvard, you're required to retain essential research records for a minimum of 7 years. Understanding data retention is going to help with budget planning and determining how long you actually need to house the data. The retention will depend on the type of data, the purpose for which the data has been collected, policies of funding agencies, or your parent institution. You also have requirements from agencies like the IRB, or you might have to consider intellectual property rights, human subjects data. So there are all these factors that might affect retention periods. However, like I mentioned, data retention policies here at Harvard only apply to quote unquote essential research data and records. This is data that's integral to substantiating grant applications, published research, patents, or other funding requests, or those records that are considered for permanent retention by the archive. If it falls outside of these guidelines, it does not need to be retained. The 7-year retention policy applies to essential research records. Outside of that, the data can get deleted. Okay, so now that we understand how to migrate data through the data lifecycle, storing the data based on its utility and accessibility, we can talk about the various storage offerings provided by FASRC. Each FASRC account is provided with a 100 gigabyte home directory for individual use. And then each PI or lab account receives a 4 terabyte lab directory for use by all members of that PI's lab group. And then they also can receive a 50 terabyte allotment of scratch space. Home directories are intended to be used as personal user storage. It's not really recommended for computational purposes, and it is limited to that 100 gigabyte space, so it's not expandable. So it should really be used for storing items like documentation, scripts, code, things like that. The lab directories are general lab storage. They are referenced from NetScratch, so you can move data back and forth, and is provided free of charge to all lab groups, again, with a fixed 4 terabyte limit, so that can't be expanded. This is just like a general lab space that you can use to deposit shared data. Scratch is a temporary storage location. It has high rewrite speeds, so it should be used for high performance data analysis. The data will be removed after 90 days of no access, so don't retain anything important in there. No irreplaceable data should go in Scratch, but it is a great place that you can test out different methods or scripts or rerun your analysis, as the data will be automatically cleaned up if you don't touch it. In terms of our paid storage service offerings, FAS Research Computing is transitioning to a new storage infrastructure. The project is going to consolidate and modernize a significant portion of our existing storage file systems, and it's going to move to all new and improved hardware. So the new storage is going to replace our outdated file systems, realign our storage options with the research data lifecycle. It's going to incorporate more enterprise-grade features, and it's going to set us up for success in terms of a sustainable service model. We did purchase over 70 petabytes of new data storage. These new storage offerings are going to be implemented and available starting next year. These are the new storage offerings we're going to have, starting with compute storage. This will be an active storage for data analysis, as it's adjacent to our high performance compute cluster. It's going to be optimized for high intensity workflows like AI and machine learning. Then we have our lab storage. This is going to be a general purpose storage that will be intended to house your raw and project data. It can also be used as a landing space or a buffer storage if you have lab instruments. It is going to have backups and disaster recovery, so it's going to be ideal for retaining most types of your lab data. And then we'll have long-term storage, which is intended to house research data towards the end of your life cycle in order to meet institutional data retention and compliance requirements. This is an alternative to Nessie tape. So it's going to be an on-premise long-term storage option that is maintained by FASRC and will be available to Harvard affiliated labs. Nessie tape will remain the same, so it will stay as is. It's managed by the Northeast Storage Exchange. They will continue to operate it and manage it. I do want to mention the price will be increasing for an SC tape. Many of our labs are already using tape to store their inactive research data, and so that is going to remain the same. The only difference is the price. And then lastly is FASRC, which again was our secure cluster environment that's designed to hold data that has a higher security level. Like if you have a DUA or an IRB requirement and you have to store it in a level 3 storage environment, which I'll talk about in a second, we do offer FASRC. And this new hardware will offer encryption at rest, which is a great added feature for the new storage environment. This diagram just showcases how you could incorporate the various storage options into your workflow, both the free and paid services. The general gist of the workflow is that labs should be utilizing multiple storage offerings depending on how they plan to utilize their data, what type of data they're acquiring or generating, and then what the features of the storage are, like if you need backups, and the costs as well. A little bit about tape storage. Currently, the only tool available that can move data in and out of tape is Globus, which I mentioned in a previous slide. You can get 20 terabyte chunks of tape, so allocations are 20 terabyte physical tapes. If you move more than 20 terabytes to tape, you will need multiple tapes. There are a lot of restrictions and limitations with tape, which I've included there on the slide. Like, for example, you're limited to 10,000 files per directory. File sizes need to range from 1 to 100 gigabytes. There's no direct access to tape. So basically, Globus will scan the data set before it gets moved to tape. And then that's the same way that you would retrieve data from tape is you would use Globus to bring the data back. As I mentioned, the cost will be increasing to $15 per terabyte per year. And then one last thing to keep in mind with tape is that you can only store research data up to Harvard Security Level 2 in tape. Speaking of Harvard data security levels, so most institutions will have security levels for their research data. Here at Harvard, we have a multi-level security system. So there are 5 data security levels indicating what tools or platforms you can use for each level. So it goes from 1 to 5. Level 1 is publicly available information. This is basically any information you'll find on our website or anything that's public. And then it goes all the way up to level 5, which is very sensitive and secure data. Most of the data that we house is level 1 or 2. If you have data that's considered level 4, then you'll have to talk to other entities, maybe like university research computing, or over at the medical school, they also have a sensitive research data environment. So one straightforward data security strategy I recommend is the 2-2-1 rule. This rule stipulates you should be retaining an extra copy of your data on a different type of storage, with one of those types being offsite. An example of this, if you have a master copy of raw data on your lab computer, make sure that your lab computer has some sort of backup system like CrashPlan that will back up those files to a cloud resource. So in that case, you have one copy on your computer, one copy in the cloud. This makes sure that your data is spread across multiple types of storage and diffuses the risk that your data will be lost or you don't have another copy. It can also prevent total data loss due to localized events out of your control, like fire or flood or theft. It is good to periodically confirm that those backups are actually working. So don't just install it and then hope for the best. On top of reviewing your data to identify what should be retained, it is imperative to ensure other steps are taken to make sure your data is accessible and available to others, especially if you're getting ready to leave the lab. We do recommend backing up and moving any personal files or departmental files from local computers to group storage locations. This includes any data housed in cloud-based folders like Dropbox, Google Drive, and OneDrive. Make sure that they are accessible to your PI or group leader or anyone else in your lab, because we've had people leave the institution, they left their data in personal files, their personal OneDrive, and then it's really difficult to get that information back. For any data that's not been moved to long-term storage or an archive for retention purposes and you want to delete it, just confirm with your PI prior to any deletion of the data. And then store your lab notebook and other lab records according to lab protocol and confirm that they're accessible to any remaining group members. And lastly, if you'd like to take data with you, if you're getting ready to leave the university and you are moving somewhere else and you want to bring the data with you from your project, you do have to get permission from the university to do so. You will have to get written permission from the university to take data. So please consult with your PI and your department before you remove any data from the university. To help your group manage your storage, we have developed a few useful storage tools. The first one is ColdFront. ColdFront is an open source research allocation management system that is designed to provide a central portal for administration, usage reporting, and allocation management. We adapted an open source software to help you manage your storage allocations. You can view and add projects. If you have a new project or you'd like another storage folder, you can request that through this tool. You can add and remove lab members. If someone's left your lab, you can take them off your lab group through this tool. You can make changes to your storage allocation amount. So if you have a 20 terabyte folder and you want to request 10 more terabytes, you can do that through this tool. So it's really useful. I do recommend taking a look as it can give you an overview of your storage usage and who's listed on the lab group account. Another tool you can use that we've worked with a third-party vendor to develop is the Starfish user interface. It's a self-service tool that allows users to view their storage amounts and the location of their data. You can actually view additional metadata in the tool and navigate through the folder structures. And it's really helpful for data organization and cleanup efforts. You can actually export the metadata in a CSV file. So I'll show you what that looks like. This is a snapshot of a lab's Starfish zone, and it has metadata fields, including the folder name, the folder path, the last modification date, the dataset size, and the number of files. You can also apply organizational tags to the folder names that can help with identifying data that could be moved to long-term storage. So you can actually go through your list of all the folders in your lab environment and start tagging which ones you want to move to tape. And then it will actually create a list for you of all those folders and you can export it to a CSV. So it's really helpful with data cleanup efforts. And then real quick, I do want to mention data sharing, why I think it's important and why you should be thinking about open access as well. If you've been keeping your data organized and documented throughout the project, then hopefully data sharing will be easy. But in order to publish your data, you need some sort of infrastructure that can help support your efforts, as well as help with discovery and long-term accessibility of your data. This is the role of data repositories. They provide the technical infrastructure for access and curation of your research data, and they provide a framework for you to help describe your data using metadata standards. There are generally three types of data repositories. You have institutional, disciplinary, and generalist. Institutional repositories are for researchers at particular institutions in order to share their work. You also have disciplinary repositories like dbGaP or GEO for genomic data. These are targeted places for certain types of data. And then generalist repositories are really designed to house all types of data and research outputs. You'll start from left to right. So I recommend starting with identifying whether you have an institutional repository. You should use that first. And then if there are specific repositories for your data type, use those next. And then for any data that doesn't qualify for those types of repositories, generalist repositories are an excellent option. I've listed some advantageous characteristics of general repositories on the slide, including unique and persistent identifiers like DOIs, long-term sustainability of your data sets. They offer metadata cleanup. They can help with data curation. They're free. They offer data security and access controls. Oftentimes, they'll meet the data retention policies of major funders, and they are supportive of this fair data principle. So a general repository that we do recommend using is Harvard Dataverse. It's a free web-based data repository open to all researchers from any discipline inside or outside of Harvard. You can share your data with the general public, or you can restrict access so you have control over your access requirements. You'll get that DOI. You can also deposit up to 2.5 terabytes for free. And you can even deposit more. You just have to talk to IQSS and Harvard Library to see how much data you can deposit. It also goes up to Harvard Security Level 2, so keep that in mind. And then there's also Dash, which is Harvard's central open access repository managed by Harvard Library. The articles from Dash are free to download, they're available to anyone, and they're free from most copyright and licensing restrictions. They also support browsing and search capabilities. So you can actually search using the Hollis search engine, the library's search catalog. And then open access, most of you are familiar with open access, but it's just this international movement that's seeking to grant free and open access to academic information. A publication is defined as open access when there's no financial, legal, or technical barriers in order to access the information. So we do recommend publishing in an open access journal and depositing your publications in an open access repository like Dash so that your data is available to others in the scientific community. To wrap up, I do want to reiterate the various tools and services that we've talked about throughout this presentation, so you can use them as part of your research data lifecycle. So you can help set up your research project by using the electronic lab notebook like RSpace, and you can develop a data management plan using the DMP tool. As you start to analyze your data, you can use tools like protocols.io, GitHub, OSF to help track data, code, and protocols throughout your project. You can use tools like Starfish and ColdFront to keep track of your storage. You can use Globus for data transfers. And finally, as you're beginning to share and reuse your data, you can use data repositories like Harvard Dataverse. You can store your data in Nessie Tape, and you can use Dash, which is also that publication repository that's managed by Harvard. So that's a wrap up. I know we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Please complete the survey seminar that's there on the QR code. We do use the survey to help us refine these types of seminars and offer other trainings for the community in the future. If you thought there was something I was going to talk about today and I didn't, and you would love to have a training on that, please write that in our survey. We would love to tailor these trainings more to the community. I'm going to stop recording. Brad, do you mind stopping the recording?